everybody. Oh, look at your smiling face, Bobby Cobb. That was very nice to open to that. We are the Presence Posse, and we are here today to speak to you about the stories we tell ourselves and what presence has to do with that. And this was actually your suggestion, wasn't it, Bobby?
Yeah, it was the result of a comment that I made that I think that resonated with you deeply. I don't remember exactly what it was that I wrote, and it was my take on a previous thought. I'm certainly not the first person that's posited this, but I suggested that we're never mad or angry or experiencing any negative emotions about the moment that is actually in front of us or the moment that we are in or what's happening now. Rather, we're angry at the story that we're telling ourselves about the moment that is happening right now. And I use that as a trigger for myself, and I work with my clients to help install that as a trigger in them to just have that be a catalyst, a cause for a pause, to kind of sit back and, we've talked a lot on this that my my perspective is that our emotions are really only ever telling us about our inner weather, never telling us about our circumstances. So our 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 negative emotions, when we're just feeling a little bit of yuckiness, through a very little bit of training, it really doesn't take very long at all, we can suddenly see that as a pattern interrupt. We can stop the story that's going on in our head and use our wonderfully powerful critical thinking to just begin to explore, what am I telling myself about this moment that is causing me to be upset, angry, anxious, whatever the experience is. And you can do it with positive emotions too. If you're experiencing joy, happiness, contentment, or whatever, it's also good to go and explore that, and it just gives us an opportunity to, take a look at those stories that we're telling ourselves currently. So
Lovely.
it seemed to resonate with you when
Well, I just
when I
thought it
when
would
I
make a
posted that.
really, really good, I thought it would make a really good posse talk. uh, because that's, I mean, one of the things about becoming present, becoming more present, or staying present, or being present, or however, is noticing that a lot of our experiences, as far as emotions go, feelings go, even sensations go, have to do with stories we tell ourselves. And we may not be aware of the stories, or that we are telling ourselves the story. It'll be more like, well, he said and she did and all of that, and not the actual, well, I'm telling myself this. This is my interpretation. This is my assumption. This is my judgment, whatever it is. All of those, that's, I mean, what do we mean when we're talking about stories, right? So any kind of narrative about a situation, or about another person, or even about ourselves. And then we think that we're feeling a certain way because that person did something, or this person intended to hurt us, or whatever, when it's really our own mind making some sort of interpretation or assumption about a situation. And then us assuming, we kind of make a double assumption. Somebody intended something, or this is what they meant, or this is the thing that's happening as their fault, or whatever. And then we assume that it's true, and then we act on it as if it is true. Um, so the idea then to be present to the stories that we tell ourselves is to notice when we're doing that, what we're doing, and then you guys actually talked about this a while ago. I will often start laughing at myself. Like we'll talk about something and I'll pick up what I'm doing or what I used to do. It's because a lot of times it's and it's just so funny. And the thing is how creative we can be in our interpretation of
Yeah.
situations. Like really, if you're going to use a creativity for something, choose between creating a good life for yourself and creating some sort of chaos in your mind and then acting on it as if it's true so that you create more chaos, which is, I find, quite humorous most of the time. But I'm going to actually reveal something that I did quite recently just to illustrate the point. Because we had a general assembly a week ago. Yeah. Well, not quite a week ago. And there was some conflicts going on. And I noticed at the beginning of the meeting that my watch, I use one of these smart watches, Apple Watch, and every once in a while it was going zzz, zzz, and when I looked at it, it was telling me that my heart was beating more than 100 beats per
Minute.
minute or whatever it is,
Wow.
without me moving, like I was sitting down, and my heart was beating really fast, right? So
not the best resting heart rate in the world.
yeah, no. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, what is that about?
Going on.
Yeah. So then I got really curious about what I was telling myself, right? What is going on? And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes it's in our subconscious, we're not conscious of it. And that's okay. But if we can become conscious of it, there's a superpower there. And because once we're there, we're empowered to do something about it. So I was just sort of sitting quietly amidst all the turmoil and becoming conscious of what was going on. And I was noticing that I was scaring myself, which made absolutely no sense because I wasn't going to die. And even if I was going to die, I mean, I've died so many times, it's ridiculous. If I was going to die, it's my body that's dying, it's not me, right? And I have enough experience of that to know, at least as far as I can get, that is the case. So I started to find it comical, right? My heart is going literally more than 100 beats a minute. And there's really no danger. I mean, the worst thing that could have happened was something about my reputation was ruined, right? And that can feel rather life-threatening. I've worked very hard to be in this position that I'm in, and I'm very, very grateful for where I am, and my life is very good. Thank you for everything, universe and myself. And I started to also laugh because I have this habit, and that is, well, that's a thought. Like it's just revealing to myself that it's just a thought, and how a thought, I can use a thought to create some sort of reality in me, and then like project that out like I'm in a dangerous situation or something. Like it became, I almost laughed out loud, which was, it would have been unfortunate if I had, because nobody would have understood. But the brilliant thing about it was the moment I saw, and it was like boom, the moment I saw what I was doing, it was gone. And my watch didn't make any more warnings, and I was cool as a cucumber. It was really, really cool. Really cool. So it was like the story I was telling myself about that situation, and then becoming aware of the story. And the minute it is revealed to be a story, not a reality, it's like it has no power over, like I don't have to give it any power. And so it became comical, and then it just disappeared. So I wanted to share that because I could have, like, when I started, I was in this, really, I was really scared. And how often do we do that? And then instead of, and this is where the beautiful part is, because I used to be really good at this part of latching onto the fear and staying with the fear and believing that there's something to be afraid of, and letting the fear decide what I did or how I felt or how I lived my life, because it was all fear, and trying to stop the fear and believing the fear and all about the fear. as opposed to noticing the fear. And like you say, it's information. Okay, if I'm feeling like this, what am I doing? Right. And then
Yeah,
letting
yeah.
it go because it's me doing it. It's me telling myself the story. So I don't believe the fear. I don't try to make the fear go away. I don't I don't start reacting to the fear. I just am. And I don't have to do anything. And then the fear's gone. It's brilliant.
It is brilliant. And you described it actually so beautifully and completely.
Thank you.
And there's one thing in there that as you were telling that story, I could hear um, the word that I'm going to use is not really the word that I want to use, but I'm going to say my critics, and they're not really my critics, and they're not really being critical of me. It's just that I sometimes I perceive that as criticism, and it's really more often just a request for additional information. But I could hear this cohort of people that I interact with saying, sounds like spiritual bypassing to me. So I'm curious about the fact, or I'm curious about your take on, do you ever get that when you are doing the description that you've got? It seems to me like you do, because I thought I heard something in there that was saying, you didn't say it explicitly, but it seemed like implicitly you were saying, this isn't about spiritual bypassing. It's not about ignoring or stuffing down these emotions. It's really the opposite of that. But I don't want to fill too much in. Do you get that? And are you familiar with the term? And have people accused you of that? Scare quotes, because that would be the story that we are telling ourselves. That is an indicator when we say something like, you accused me of XYZ. And people know that very often people are like, no, that's not what I meant at all. That's a signal that that's the story that's going on inside our head.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which
spiritual
is
bypassing,
wonderful.
is that a subject that comes up much in your world? And how do you see what you're describing as different from what people might be describing as spiritual bypassing?
Thank you. I love that question. Um, I have actually never been accused of spiritual bypassing. I do know what it is. And I think maybe because I understand and can put words to the difference so that I illustrate what I'm not doing and what I am doing in such a way that people recognize, or at least those who can, um,
Yeah.
recognize the difference and perhaps can check with themselves if they're ready and willing to do that and notice if they're doing the one or the other. Some people just get really angry and they will um, perhaps react or meet me with anger or resistance or something because when I describe what I'm experiencing, they notice they are not doing that, but they're doing more towards the what you call spiritual bypassing, or at least that is their impression of themselves. Then they may feel shame. And shame for myself is one of the most uncomfortable emotions to feel, or at least circumstances to feel. And I understand the intense need to push back against it. I have felt that myself. And so it's not, I have been met with that kind of response, and I do understand it very well. And I think perhaps that is part of the reason why I try to illustrate, and maybe I illustrate too much, but because I'm aware of that difference. And also I think that explaining a little bit of the difference helps people.
Yeah.
Like it supports them in their journey, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah. And it also, like, if they are experiencing shame based on something that you are saying, that is kind of also an indicator that, and it's interesting, in to the degree that we are really connected to this and we understand that a lot of the emotional pain and suffering that we experience is related to the stories that we're telling ourselves. From the moment that we understand that, now we have the ability to both go inside and go, all right, I'm really, like, I'm super pissed off right now. If you were experiencing that in the moment, what's going on? And to the degree that one of the first things that you go to is, what's the story that you're telling yourself about this moment? And yeah, I know you're familiar with the work of Byron Katie. That's my own kind of version of her work, is exploring that. You know, when somebody says, I'm really experiencing XYZ emotion, I'll normally begin, if it's a interpersonal interaction, to say, what's going on? Just tell me what's happening. And the story begins to unfold. And then the moment that you get to the point where you can say some version of it, sounds like you're telling yourself a story about XYZ. And they will either confirm or say, no, it's not XYZ, it's ABC. And then you can go in and start looking at that story. And then the second question in her process of, or maybe it's the first, is that true? You know, is the story that you're telling yourself true? Very often it comes back as, if they're being honest with themselves, well, it could be. You know, this could happen. And just making that shift from this is happening to this could happen very often creates a little space for people to get out of the story, that, you know, we get lost in the illusion that we are creating through the stories that we're telling ourselves and others. And, you know, stories are powerful. I'm not suggesting that we want to get rid of stories, because our ability to see patterns and to tell stories and to think, you know, a couple of chess moves ahead and think, well, this pattern's beginning to unfold, which means this is likely to happen. That is a superpower. It is a great strength, but used, wielded out of control, it can also do a lot of perceived harm in that. And the moment that we realize that, and we start to use that as a pattern interrupter, we start to create space. Is that true? Well, it could be. And then you can say, well, what else might happen as a result of that? And now all of a sudden, the client or the person that you're interacting with is going from, this is the train track that we're on, and I know where this train track leads to now all of a sudden, this is a probability amplitude. You know, it's something that could happen, but it's taking place within the field of all possibilities. And now we're really creating a lot more space. And in the work that I do, that now gives us the ability to go back and look at our conditioning. You know, what are the unconscious triggers that are being fired off in me right now that are leading to this, and is any of this still serving me? And, you know, that's kind of the short story of a lot of the work that I do, just helping people see that we are causing much of the things that we want to get away from, because we have not been able to transcend the story that we're telling ourselves about what's going on. And the moment that we do that, things start to look a whole lot differently.
Yes, that was beautiful. And that is exactly that. And a lot of times when people talk about this idea of enlightenment or awakening or that sort of thing, it comes down to, am I noticing that I'm the storyteller?
Yeah.
Because the moment I notice that I'm the storyteller, I'm awake now. That's
Yeah.
one way to put it.
Yeah.
And then once I notice I'm the storyteller, then I can start noticing when I tell stories, that I tell stories, how often I tell stories, where, what kind of stories, and then know what to do and distance myself from the stories and become the observer of the stories, the student even of the stories, to put it that way.
Yeah.
Because there is information, there is something to be learned, can be, from these stories, and also definitely from letting them go. And especially the part that I love to share with people, and that is how empowering it is the moment you realize that you're telling yourself a story. Because you, as the storyteller, and you knowing that you're the storyteller, are now empowered to stop telling that story and maybe change the story. If you still need a story, at least change one to something that is more supportive of you, rather than, um, to use that word, destructive, self-destructive. So, uh, and I love how you explained, I'm glad you did that, how you work, like how when people come to you, how you help them, support them in seeing this. Because not everybody's ready to know that. Some people need to stay in that. This is not a judgment. Some
Right.
people need to stay in that sort of blaming. I was there for a long time, blaming other people for my problems, just
Yeah.
not ready to accept and see that I was creating them. So when, or as, because it was a process that started as one seed and then became an entire field. Right. So starting from one thing and then realizing that, oh, I actually do this a lot. Like I was a really, really angry person and blamed everybody for everything, pretty much.
Mm.
And then I got to the point where not really anybody to blame anymore. It's not even about blame.
Ran them all off.
It's like, wait, what? There actually is no blame anywhere. And then it's kind of like this. I'd like to call it a treasure hunt. It won't be the first time anybody's heard me say that on the Presence Posse or anywhere else for that matter. The treasure hunt of finding the little gold nuggets in like the stories I'm telling, the things I'm doing, the thoughts I'm having, plans I'm making. It's all stories. And do I really need to be doing this at 3 o'clock in the morning, round and round and round I go?
Right. Right.
All of
Right.
that, instead of just admitting that underneath all of that, I feel small, I feel like I failed, whatever. And that's stories. Okay, what about that? And then let's get down to the, wait a minute, none of that is true. None of that is, I'm just, and all of a sudden it'll hit me, but aren't I God? Like, aren't I everything and everything is me? And so there's no better or worse, less than or more than, failure or win. It's all it's all good, and it's gone. It's a beautiful place just to be present to presence, which sounds a bit weird, maybe, but that's kind of the way it is. In psychotherapy, if you don't mind me mentioning that,
Mm.
and even if you do, um,
Would it matter?
I was just thinking it might be helpful because I enjoyed listening to how you work. One of the ways you work with people. In psychotherapy, I use different rows to the center. So different ways in. Sometimes it's like listening to the story, and depending on where the person is in their journey, like where I wasn't willing to hear anything. It was all everybody else. They all did it to me, to me, to me. Um, Sometimes I ask, are you willing to hear another perspective? And if they are, then I'll bring in some other way of looking at something. And then right away, it's kind of like when you ask the question, is it true? It's like, okay, I'm not I'm not telling you your story isn't true. I don't even call it a story. I'm not, your perspective isn't true. I'm just bringing in another possibility. And then you can choose, right? You can at least notice that there's another way of looking at it. And what's that like? How does that land with you? So that's one way I would work with someone if they're really um, in a story, to put it that way, since we're calling them stories. Another way is if they're really in it, like they're not coming out. It's all true. This is really it. This person's out to get me, or whatever. And sometimes people really are out to get you, but they don't necessarily think of it that like that. They're just upset and angry and hurt and scared and whatever themselves, and they're telling themselves a story also. But for the person who can't seem to get out of it, it's like, okay, let's meet you in the story. Let's be in the story together. Let's walk that. Let's make the whole scene out, what the story is, and let's have a look around. And what do you notice? And what does it feel like? And okay, you want to punch that person? Okay, here, grab a pillow. And sometimes I literally do that, and I come out, black and blue from a from a session because somebody missed the pillow. But it's like sometimes we think, again, a story, that there's something wrong with being in the feeling, being in the story, experiencing whatever it is, like anger or whatever. We shouldn't be angry. If we're speaking of spiritual bypassing, we should be better than that. We're supposed to be meditative and calm all the time or something. That's not it. So it's like, okay, you're in the anger. You're maybe carried away by the anger. We're not going to get you out of it by leading you away from it. Okay, so we meet you there, and we stay there together. And we find a way to walk the path from the anger. Because when we learn to be with anger and transmute that energy, that power, we need sometimes aggression to fuel something. A journey, stand up for ourselves, whatever it is, stay present, even stay present. And so trying to get people out of a story may not be the way to go. Sometimes it's taking them, well, if not deeper into it, it's at least being with them where they are. And that gives them the opportunity to be respected, supported, believed, because sometimes that's what they need, to be believed. And then look around and go, oh, I can look at that differently now. I don't have the emotional charge that I was attaching to it before, and now it's just a memory. And that can be so beautiful. So again, we're not talking about avoiding or bypassing. It's just different ways of being with a story and letting it go.
Yeah, two things came up for me while you were telling that, and I'll do the quick one first. That one of when we have a conversation about enlightenment or awakening or satori or kensho or whatever we're calling it, about people having self-realization that they are the spiritual beings and this is the human experience. People will tell themselves stories about what that looks like. And I was in an audience, a member as a teacher was teaching, and the subject of enlightenment came up. And this person had not been making any claims to enlightenment, but clearly that's what this talk was about. But this particular teacher was just not teaching it as an experience that we, an achievement. He was positioning it as the exact polar opposite of an achievement, that it's just something that you realize. It's like the mother of all aha moments. And somebody asked him about, well, would you consider yourself to be enlightened? And it was a long conversation that went around that, but part of it was claiming that you are enlightened and holding yourself out as an enlightened being is like the ultimate job for the ego. That is the story that the ego perhaps most wants to tell. And he suggested two things happen as soon as you make that, I am awake, I am enlightened, starts happening. Number one, you now begin watching yourself to make sure that you are acting in a way that is consistent with the declaration.
Proving your
And
story right.
yes, exactly. So boom, that is like we are the creators. We are the creator of our story. And that is the story that in all likelihood the role that the ego most wants to play. Uh, but the other thing that happens is the people that are watching you are now kind of sorting, okay, he's enlightened, so how does that mean he's going to be making his tea, and why isn't he drinking tea instead of coffee? And if he stubs his foot and drops the F bomb, it's like, oh, would he really do that? So now all of a sudden we're lost in the story as opposed to being present. And I, certainly the teachers that I follow are much more of the school that it's not a big deal. It's just a realization. You're just recognizing what already always was. And so what's dropping away is the story that you're telling yourself about the way things have to be. But we're talking about like angst and depression and all of that. I want to talk about this was the second thing. So actually, let me just pause there to see. Do you have anything to add or with that before I shift over to my next little tale? Any comments or questions or?
I had a thought from an experience I had a few years ago. A kind of a guru figure um, who I went to a workshop with this led by this person. And I was kind of looking, and it looked like he dyed his hair. Like he was, my age, or maybe I think he was older than me, and didn't have like one gray hair on his head. And I was like, looked like he dyed his hair. And in a break, we were all talking, and I don't know how we came into the topic, but it was I just mentioned that oh, I thought he dyed his hair. That sort of somebody had said something, and the one of the other people got so angry, really, like, how dare I say that about this person? And
So
my brain,
revered.
human being, like, right,
Right.
like Eckhart Tolle, I think, dyes his hair. Like, do we care? I mean, why? I don't know. Does it? It's not where I want to be focusing my life, but at the moment anyway. Um, but it was a thought for me. It was an interesting experience because I, again, every situation is an opportunity for me to look at me, which
Right.
could sound really narcissistic, but it isn't, right? Because it's not about me. It's just checking in with, okay, my feelings, my reactions, my stories. Like, do I really need to be having this right now? And what's this about? It's all an invitation, right? So I was just checking with, do I look at this person? Is there anybody I look at like that, where it would be almost catastrophic? Like, my identity would fall apart if I found out that the other person was so human as to dye his hair or her hair or something like that. And I was like, I don't, I don't see anybody, as far as I know, as not human, which means that we can all do basically anything that's human. But it's that idea of needing that figure, that guru, that sort of person, that enlightened person. Um, in a way, if I don't have that beacon of light to look at and follow and attach to, I lose my way idea. And I really felt that sort of, um, again, the respect for needing that, not seeing a way, not maybe having enough I, like being conscious enough of my I to be able to not have to latch on to an enlightened person or a person who
Hmm.
is seen as enlightened. So that's what I thought when you were talking about the enlightened person needing to be enlightened or show themselves as enlightened, can have that sort of follower leader kind of thing rather than we're all walking life, kind of that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So I just wanted to mention that was the thought I had. But what was your second point? Because I'm really curious now.
Yeah, my second one, it doesn't really have anything to do with uh, like super deep stuff, but it does demonstrate the power of this sort of inquiry in doing things. So, I'm in the business of coaching people. One of the ways that I do that is come up with little programs that we can go through, maybe a 90-day coaching program or whatever. And I've been a professional coach since 2003. So I've created a lot of stuff over the years. And the coaching that I used to do was all very much interpersonal stuff. It was for financial advisors and teaching them how to be more trusted by their clients. And I would come up with products for them. And the story that I was telling myself during that period, the early period, was I'm new at this game. I've got good visibility. If I come up with a flop, then I could blow everything. So, I had some real good success and I became super attached to that success. And brand building is a good thing right up until it's not. When it becomes all about the brand, then suddenly maybe it's not serving us so much better. So I would create these new products, and based on the story that I was telling myself in my head, it had to be perfect. The debut of it had to be absolutely flawless. So what that ended up doing was really creating paralysis by analysis, that I would have all of these things, but I would think they're not ready, they're not ready, they're not ready. And I started to study with a guy named Dan Kennedy, and one of his key things was money loves speed. And that was the first thing. I was one time in a coaching session with him. I'm showing him all of these things, and he's just like, great, how is it doing? And I'm like, well, I haven't launched it yet. I haven't launched it yet. I haven't launched it yet. And he's like, I think I've diagnosed your problem. And and then we had a long talk about money loving speed. And I'm like, well, I don't want to roll it out half-assed. And he goes, well, I'm not recommending that you roll it out half-assed. But, have you ever heard the phrase good is good enough, and that perfection is the enemy of the good enough? So that started to create a little shift. And one thing that I noticed was, and I didn't notice this in the moment, I would roll it out, I would get it to where I thought it was perfect. And it wasn't, because it was me in a vacuum creating, and it was me telling a story that I'm going to say this, and then people are going to say this back to me, and then I'm going to say this, and then people are going to say. So I've got the whole thing scripted out on how it goes. But the problem was the people that I was presenting it to never followed their script that I had written for them in my head. And somewhere along the way of that Dan Kennedy coaching and my need for, I wasn't really shooting for total perfection, but I was shooting for pretty close to perfection. And that was all based on the story that I was telling myself. Ultimately, what happened, and this was years later that I realized this, I made a new association. I had an aha moment. But it wasn't an aha moment like I'm slapping my head and going, oh my God, how did I not realize this? It was just one that kind of snuck up on me. And then years later, I had the realization that no matter how much time I spend in a vacuum creating these scripts that I think are going to happen, I'm never going to get that right. So I need to get to the point where it's good enough that I can bring it out to the public. And then what ended up happening, and this was kind of a Dan Kennedy idea as well, I created the inner circle, my R&D team. And the members of my R&D team felt special because they were seeing things first. But in the way that the R&D team was structured, they knew it wasn't going to be perfect. So I didn't have the pressure of thinking that I was, going to blow my brand and getting into that paralysis. And they weren't expecting perfection. In fact, when they said, I think it would be better this, or have you thought about doing it this way, they now see themselves as contributing to the process. And then when I would release that product, I would have like a little acknowledgments page on the website. I'd really like to thank Dave and Bill and Susan and Karen and everybody who helped me in the creation of this project. So, that became like a weird sort of like higher end coaching group because of the recognition within the industry. It was financial services industry is a big industry, but it's not that big. A lot of people still know a lot of people, and getting your name on one of those things made a difference. And the only thing that changed, and it took a while to do it, like I said, it was not an aha moment, but really the only thing that changed was the story that I was telling myself on the inside about what was permissible. And you can imagine the end result of that was like the floodgates of creativity were open. And a lot of the stuff that I produced what didn't resonate. It was kind of, the jokes that I thought were going to be so funny didn't get laughs, and a lot of other jokes got laughs. The things that I thought were the key features, advantages, and benefits of this particular program weren't the feedback that I was getting. And oftentimes people would say the results that I got was, drastically different than what you thought it was going to be. And that happens in the real world all the time. Post-it notes, the guy who created Post-it notes was looking for super glue. And that was an experiment that didn't work. What's minoxidil, which men and women now use to grow hair, was originally a blood pressure medication. And it didn't do that great as a blood pressure medication, but it did really good growing hair. I don't know what Viagra was initially, but it was not for erectile dysfunction. Whatever it was for, it wasn't delivering the results there. But the people who were on it that were part of the R&D team said, I really like this though, because my wife is smiling a lot more these days. So I want to keep taking that medicine, and I don't care that it doesn't help me with whatever it was supposed to help me. It helps me in another department. So giving ourselves permission to, be a little bit more creative can be a result of looking at the stories that you're telling yourself. And I think the beauty of that is the moment that we start looking in that direction, we're no longer the victim that you described yourself as having once been. And, victims get really good that I'm a victim muscle and you are to blame muscle can really, really grow if you work it out enough. And the moment that we begin to make a shift, and instead of saying, my emotions are telling me about my circumstances, and it's telling me where to point my finger and who to blame, and beginning to realize our emotions are just telling us about two things that I think our emotions are telling us once we really start to delve in there. They're telling us about a need that we have that is going unmet. Um, my hearing is not good, and I'm like getting fitted for hearing aids probably, and it's particularly bad with my partner because my partner is soft spoken. She talks a little bit under her breath, and her voice happens to be the range where I'm the weakest. That's the where she's broadcasting. And we both get a little frustrated at times. And we're frustrated because I'm telling myself, why can't she just speak clearly? And why can't she just make sure that I'm hearing her message? And she's thinking, why doesn't he just stop what he's doing? And why, I wear earphones when I'm recording. I wear them when I'm walking the dog because I'm listening to podcasts and other stuff that I like to listen to. So, she's going, why is he wearing those damn AirPods again? And we're getting frustrated at the story. The moment that we begin to look inside, and I say, clearly, I've got a problem here that I need to fix. And she begins to think, well, clearly, if she knows that I can hear. And when she wants something to really hear, she'll check in and say, did you get all of that? And I'll repeat back, yes, here's what I heard. Boom, 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 boom. And everything's crystal clear. Hopefully it'll be even better once I'm fitted for the hearing aids. But the moment that we begin not looking outside of us to create a new story about why we're feeling the way that we're feeling, and we begin to look inside and say, what story am I telling myself at this moment, and how lost am I in that story right now? How convinced that the way I think things are probably going to unfold is the only way that I can see it happening. Yeah,
That was gorgeous.
A beautiful thing.
That was
Thank you.
gorgeous. And yeah, I like that just at the very end, that sort of how like I'll sometimes say, how invested am I in an outcome, or how invested am I in a story?
Yeah.
Like what is the big gain that I'm telling myself?
Yeah.
And a lot of times if I'm looking at my own situation, like you were talking about a need, and for me it'll often be to do with safety, something to do with safety. And sometimes I'll reflect on there's a member of my family who talks about it was like growing up with machine guns around the house all the time. You're always terrified all the time because parents are carrying, or people are carrying, these machine guns, and it's very hard to think clearly when you're terrified all the time.
Yeah.
Or even that idea of coming home from school and knowing what you're walking into, even that whole thing. And so paying attention to this, even after all of the years of sort of me being still, it shows up in a need for safety. And if you don't mind, I'm going to share a bit of a story that's similar to yours in the respect of what I'm telling myself, and then not having scripted the whole thing, but it's the idea of me. People talk about imposter syndrome, not being able to, and I think I would use this as an example of that, the story I was telling myself, because I was working with somebody, a coach that we both know. Actually, it's how we met, through this particular coach. We got to get him on the Presence Posse one of these days as a guest. And he wanted me to talk about the services that I offer, and he kept coming back to the speed, like people getting the help they need faster than you ever thought possible was one of the things he would say. Faster than you ever thought possible. Fast. It was all about rapid. And we actually changed my Facebook group, the name of it, to Rapid Rise, because we're noticing the rapidity. And I'm sitting going, I don't want to have that name, and I don't want that to be my byline, because there's no way I'm going to be able to live up to that. I can't promise that at all, et cetera, et cetera. So no. And then what ended up happening was I had a few calls, getting people on the calls. And what I have decided to do, or what I had decided to do for the moment, was not just talk to people, because it doesn't really work. The way I work is not a lot of words. So it's an experiential thing. So my idea is, if I'm going to get anybody to call, it's like we're going to experience stuff. So I sort of told anybody who's trying to teach me how to sell, it was like, it's got to be this way. And this guy was like, okay. I got a few people on calls, and within like 10 minutes, and again, I just started laughing at myself, right? Because they're like, oh, I need to be doing this, or, oh, right? And I'm like, I'm just sitting there going, well, that was fast. And even having done research, like I wrote a second master's degree, for heaven's sake, right? But I'm still telling myself, because I'm afraid of what'll happen if I even say that it could be fast, right? You could actually. But I stopped doing that. I've stopped feeling that fear. I've stopped telling myself that I have something to be afraid of, and just allow the possibility to be there that they could actually notice something within a very few minutes. And they're doing it. That's the beauty of the experiential part. They're doing it. And so I was so fascinated with bing, the light bulb going on, going, look what you've been doing to yourself based on that story you've been telling yourself about, I can't, I'd better not, what if? What if is the thing I hear most often as a psychotherapist. What if? If people could just... I'm actually going to put my contact information up there. Because what if y'all are, and anybody who's watching this, you're not sure if you get in touch with your stories, see if you get in touch with the number of times you think to yourself, what if? What if it goes wrong? What if I make a mistake? What if that kind of thing. It's all story. Because, I mean, it's not real. It's something you're imagining in your head, and then you're acting like it's real, but it hasn't happened. Something might have happened at some time in your life before, where you did something and it may not have turned out the way you thought, and maybe it actually turned out in a way that you felt was very, very painful. That doesn't mean it's going to happen now. It doesn't mean it's going to happen this time, because this time is not that. And you're not the same person as that person. So it's like, okay, what if it happens? Instead of going, what if, and then reacting, how about, what if it does happen? Okay. Why would you want to automatically think, another story, that you can't handle it?
Right.
Because a lot of the times these stories we're telling ourselves have to do with that very thing. It's like, I'm not going to be able to deal with the pain, or I'm not going to be able to deal with the consequences. I can't handle this. I can't handle that. Well, if you've been in a situation in your past where you felt like you couldn't handle it, and that is often the case when we're young and we're given something that's way above our skill level because we haven't learned the stuff yet, we're kids. Doesn't mean that's going to happen now, because you're not the same person. It's not the same situation. So being completely present to the possibility. What if it does happen? Okay, how are you going to meet that then? Instead of, oh, I can't do it because what if? And then keeping with the fiction of it, and then never even experiencing. And then maybe, you never do whatever it is, and it wouldn't have gone wrong. But the idea that you wouldn't be able to handle it, well, maybe if you actually do not consider what you need in order to meet the situation, but then you're setting yourself up, not necessarily setting yourself up to fail, but you are setting yourself up for a story on
Yeah.
a story on a story.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to my story that I shared, that all of my uh, hesitation and resistance that I was experiencing was a direct result of my what if questions. Because I was saying to myself, what if I roll this out and it's not perfect? And all of a sudden, this image that I assumed people had that I was creating these perfect products to begin with, that's a hell of a story that I was telling myself. And that wasn't true because that was the thing that happened later was I looked back and goes, I never got it right in the first place anyway. Because, the first time that I told the story, the new story of, whatever product was being created, the way that I told it the first time was never as good as the way that I told it the fifth time, which was never as good as the way that I told it the 10th and the 20th and the 50th time, because I was now getting the feedback. And the what if is interesting, though, because you don't want to go so far back on the what if that you no longer consider that as something that could happen. But like I coach new hypnotists that are like in their business building phase of their practice, and they often get stuck that they want to have a quote joke in hypnosis is our private practice is when we set up our office and we sit there by ourselves practicing privately. And so it can become that paralysis thing. And people will say, well, what if I screw up? And you can honestly say, well, yeah, what if you do screw up? Because that
Exactly.
could happen.
You ground it.
Yeah.
Let's stay present to that.
Yeah. And then what will you do? And it just ends up making such a big and beautiful difference because now you are you're back at choice, as opposed to when we're lost in that story, we think we're on a train track and there's no varying from that train track. And the moment that we begin telling ourselves a different story, or ultimately no story at all, then that's really where liberation and freedom start to just flow dramatically through us, and it makes all the difference. One other thing that I want to just leave with from an interpersonal standpoint, there is a presupposition in neurolinguistic programming, kind of one of their foundational ideas, that people are always doing the very best they can based on the resources that they have access to in the moment. And that's a powerful thing because it can serve as rumble strips on the highway of life for us when we're feeling unresourceful to go, okay, where am I lost in my story? But on an interpersonal, in terms of interacting with other people, to the degree that we can hold the realization that if you and I, for example, were having some sort of interpersonal conflict, all it would take is either of us to recognize the other is doing as good as they can based on the story that they're telling themselves in the moment. And if we're not getting the results that we want, maybe it's a good idea to back up and go, okay, what's the story that I'm telling myself? And now it becomes a catalyst for inquiry. And you can see my behavior based on that idea and the fact that it was causing me not to release these products that ended up being pretty decent. They weren't done, but they were ready for they were ready for off Broadway at the very least, and we had something that was working with. And I can remember another experience that I had the first time that I ever cried on stage. I started to tell a story, and it like came up in a Q&A part of the session, and there was one event that had happened in my life that was very emotional and raw to me still, but I knew telling that story would be okay, and I felt like I had rejected telling it because I was afraid I might cry if I told this story. So this time I think I'm going to be okay. I get like 2/3 of the way into the story, and I'm getting closer and closer to the really emotional part, and I can feel myself welling up and thinking, this was a mistake story I'm telling myself. I shouldn't have gone here, because story I'm telling myself, if as a professional motivational speaker, I cry while I'm on stage, my career is over. That was the story that I was telling myself. And beautifully as it worked out, I was too far in. I couldn't just say, never mind. I had them, I had them hooked, and they were ready for the payoff. So I went through and I did cry. I had to use my 2-hand stress disintegrator to get through the rest of the story. And when I was done, and there was time for mixing and mingling later, the universal feedback that I received, and there may have been people that just weren't offering their feedback, but the universal feedback that I received, and it was a lot of people coming up and going, that was one of the best presentations I've ever listened to. And it was because of that moment. And, they would say that was the bravest thing that I'd ever seen. You were so raw, so transparent, and so willing to share, so open. And I'm like, wow, so different from the effing story that I was telling myself. Hello.
Yeah.
And then now all of a sudden, and that was a big, the other one, it took me a couple of years to unpack. That one was instantaneous. I was just like, man, that story I was telling myself was such BS. And I actually use that sometimes when I'm with clients that are too wrapped up in their story. I will sometimes say to them, and you need to have rapport to be able to do that. And I said, well, that's just your BS that is coming to go here. And people will sometimes be shocked and sometimes angry. And I'm like, hold on, BS is your belief system. What's the story that you're telling yourself that is causing this to unfold the way that it is? And it, serves as a pretty elegant pattern interrupt, and, creates a little confusion, which creates the potential for response. It makes us more response able in
There's
the
an opening
process.
there. Yeah. We're over time, so we're gonna, I was gonna say close down. I'm just gonna mention the idea of people are doing the best they can, or something like, wasn't that what it was? The NLP things, like people.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That is
They're
a
doing the
story.
best. Go ahead.
And so it's okay. That is a story. Now, the idea of stories, I mean, we've been talking about a lot about stories. Some stories can be very helpful to bring us back to an experience of safety or detachment. I mean, detachment not as in dissociation, but letting things go, not hanging onto a story.
Yeah.
And
Unattachment.
sometimes meeting a story
Non-attachment.
with a story can be supportive. until we can release both of them. As I was listening, I was thinking people are doing the best they can. I can also consider just I'm doing the best I can. If
Yes.
I'm stuck, blaming somebody or interpreting somebody or assuming something about someone, well, that's where I am right now. And very often, just even thinking that thought, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's gone. I'm back to, don't have to think that at all. I just wanted to bring that point in because sometimes meeting a story with a story can also be a way to bring us back to presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But it's not all bad stories.
and, and they're not bad at all.
Thank
I mean,
you.
if you
Yeah.
look at I mean, the entertainment industry is an industry, books, movies, plays, songs. Those are all stories and they're meaningful. And, when friends get together, there's great joy in retelling old war stories of things that you've been through together. It's one of the ways that we bond. And historically, before there was written history, there was oral history. All teaching was done through stories. Jesus taught through parables, which are stories. So, this is by no means, this podcast is by no means a condemnation of stories, but to the degree that we're able to recognize that it is both one of our greatest strengths, and the flip side of that coin is it's also one of our biggest weaknesses. Probably every world conflict, there's terrible things going on in the Middle East right now, and there's two very different narratives about what's going on, two very different stories that people have on, in the US, we're going to have a contentious election in 2 weeks and 1 day. And whatever happens as a result of that, it'll be the stories that people have been telling themselves that are unfolding. And, maybe they'll learn a new story in the process. And really all reframing is creating a new story, assigning a new meaning to that.
Mm.
In fact,
I'm just going to.
Can I share one last thing, and I'll make it real quick? I know we're over, but
Okay. We can. We decide
what
on the
story
button.
are we telling ourselves to make it think
Yeah,
we can't?
exactly. I was like, well, people can stop watching if they would like to stop watching.
I had a client call me up not too long ago and asked if I could help them forget somebody. And it was a gentleman. He had fallen madly in love with a woman and thought that they were going to spend the rest of their lives together, but things didn't work out for a couple of reasons. And now the story that he was telling himself was he'll never find another woman that would be able to make him as happy as this one woman had made him during their 6 months or so that they had been together before things fell apart. And so in his telling me his story, I came to see that one of the ingredients of his story was that he could never meet another woman that would make him that happy. And so I said, it sounds like you're telling yourself that you could never. And he's like, well, obviously, yes. And I said, is that true? And can you know that that's true? What if the role that this woman was to play in your life was simply to show you above everything that you've come to believe was the limit that you could love another person? She was here to show you, no, there's a whole another level above that. And what if the next one comes, the next person that you meet is the one who person A was telling you and helping you get prepared for person B. And that's exactly what happened. He met another person who he loved as much or more and didn't have the problems that he had with the first person, and she didn't have the problems with him that the first person. So, just going from, and that was a big moment for him, just to consider that thought and open himself up to the possibility that maybe this isn't a train track that you're on that leads to a very negative destination. Maybe it's a pathway or a highway, and there's an exit ahead that you can take and move on and do a little
There's
bit
a
differently.
whole
So,
sort of other side to the what if in this. We spoke about what if a moment ago. The what if it goes well, right? So the
mhm.
what if there's another level? What if this person is an opening? What if like there's a different aspect to stories? What if stories that go in that direction? Um, there's a sort of level of openness, trust, being that we haven't really touched much upon during this particular talk. Um, and also, you were into something, you just touched on the stories we tell each other when we're together. And that idea, like one of the thoughts I had around that is what kind of stories do we tell each other when we're together? Do we tell the ones where, yeah, that guy was a jerk and, and we bring it all down? Or like, are we going in a different direction? Some
Yeah.
people would say, are you going towards dark? Are you going towards light? Whatever you want to call it. The stories. So there's opportunity for other posse talks about this particular topic or satellite topics about this particular topic. Don't be surprised if we return to this very topic in another form on another posse talk. So, having said that, I thank everyone who has been with us on this talk watching. You are more than welcome to, if you haven't written comments, and I haven't seen any, so I hope everything's working. Write your comments, ask us questions, follow, even suggest topics for other Presence Posse talks, and we will address those. And Bobby, always, always, always a pleasure to be with you.
Back
And
at you, sister.
thank you very much. And I look forward to put it that way, the next Posse Talk. We don't know what our topic's going to be, but we do know that it's going to, well, we don't even know that, whether it's going to be next Monday or not. We assume for the moment it's going to be in a week's time on Monday, the 28th. And we will get back to you on our page in our group on Facebook and let you know when and what. So stay tuned and thanks again for joining us. See you soon.
Ciao for now.